everybody. I'll be introducing three speakers for the next session. The first speaker is Tom Anderson, Provincial Archives of Alberta. Tom is Manager, Private Records at the Provincial Archives of Alberta. He holds a Master of Arts from the University of Saskatchewan and an MLIS and an MAS from the University of British Columbia. These are library degrees. And he will be talking about Ukrainian archival heritage at the Provincial Archives of Alberta.
You get me again, the coveted after lunch heavy talk time. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me if I speak from here?
Yes.
Okay. So, today I wanted to give you a very general, very high level overview of the Ukrainian holdings at the Provincial Archives of Alberta, or as we call it, the PAA. I will briefly touch on some of the projects we have undertaken to make the records available, as well as some of the challenges that I have faced related to Ukrainian records in our holding. But I promise I will end on a positive note. So, first of all, what do we do at the PAA? You can see our website there. I would urge you, I didn't bring any cards, of course, so if you have questions about our holdings, if you have questions about donation, if you have questions about anything, call the main switchboard and just ask for Tom, and I can try and help. So, what do we do? Well, the Provincial Archives has been around for more than 50 years. It is our mandate to acquire, preserve, and make available records of enduring value about Alberta and about its people and its heritage. We are the repository of the Government of Alberta, and the majority of our holdings reflect this. About 85 or 90% of our holdings are government records. So these document the decision-making bureaucracy and the legal foundations of our province. They also include pretty much everything you could think a government can create. This includes court files, vital statistics records, premiers and departmental papers, legislation and program files, even records of the old territories, and cover pretty much from the late 1800s up till the present day. The other 15% of the holdings are made up of what we term private records, so anything not created by government. And these are the records that I work with. There are records in any format created by individuals, families, organizations, businesses, municipalities, churches, you name it, we have it. Almost everything. The majority of the Ukrainian records in our holdings are found in that private records area. There are about 140 items, files, collections, or fonds that I would describe as Ukrainian, and part of our private records donations. Of course, many of the province-wide projects or the educational programs and policies that are related in some way to the Ukrainians in the province are found in government material. But I'm focusing today on the private records holdings. Okay, so what types of Ukrainian records do we have at the PAA? Well, the bulk of our holdings that are in Ukrainian are Ukrainian related or come to us from descendants of Ukrainians, are very much like any other donation in our private records area. We preserve letters, scrapbooks, oral histories, maps and plans, school records, memoirs, writings, and family photos. The majority of the records are from families and groups, and they may be created by Ukrainian Albertans or about Ukrainian-related subjects, about a place where Ukrainians have settled, or from a lot of Ukrainian organizations. In general, organizations form the backbone of the private records program, and the Ukrainian records follow this trend. The work organizations and societies do often embrace many aspects of social, political, cultural, and of course religious activities in the province. The records that these groups create document the activities and the development of the group itself. But of course I'm always pleased to acquire records of new organizations. because these groups often provide insight into the lives and the activities of individuals and families in the various communities where Ukrainians have settled throughout the province. We also preserve records that document Ukrainian cultural, art, and religious events, provide biographical and genealogical information of pioneer families, and we document everyday lives on the farm. We also have a huge number of county, municipal, and school district records that reflect the local interactions between government and its population. We also preserve extensive audiovisual holdings of Ukrainian photographers and filmmakers. So in combination with the other material in our vaults, I would say we have a strong and robust body of records that are accessible, interesting, and open and available to researchers of Alberta's Ukrainians, no matter what they're looking for. So how did the PAA get to this point? The Archives was fortunate to have a few things going for it in the past 30 years. We have the resources of the provincial government to staff the building and to serve the public. And since 2003, we have a state-of-the-art building to preserve the records. If you signed up for the tour this afternoon, and apparently there's a lot of people coming, you'll be able to see that building. And of course, you get to spend more time with me. We also have had an active acquisitions program to acquire records of Ukrainians, the pioneers, and their descendants in the province. As with many of our donations, sometimes we don't need to do anything. People just come in, and they happen to be Ukrainian or of Ukrainian descent, and they give us the records. There's nothing targeted about it. This is certainly not surprising, given the large Ukrainian population that we have in the province. However, one of the main factors that has developed our strong program, I would suggest, was the work of former staff who started with the PAA in the 1990s, were Ukrainian, had a connection to the community, or were interested in it. I mean, this is something that I've always known, but I guess I never thought about how the development of our Ukrainian holdings came about. We recently revised and republished an annotated guide to the holdings at the PAA. I believe it was in the tote bag that everyone got. And so in preparation for our discussion today, I went through the entries in this guide. As I say, there are about 140 of them. And I wanted to see when exactly the records, the items, the files, and phone came into the archives. I found that in the 1960s, when the PAA was first established, there were only about 13 items or phone with Ukrainian content. I was very surprised to see that about half the entries in the guide, about 70 of them, appeared to be donations from the 1970s and the 1980s. It was the 1990s that saw 28 new donors, and in the 2000s there have been 23. So looking a little more closely in terms of the number of donations only, the bulk of these came in the 60s to the 1980s. But many of them consisted of only small donations, pamphlets, a couple of photographs, a small amount of textual records. But an interesting thing happened in the 90s that corresponded with staff turnover in the archives. I could see that while we are still burdened in the 90s with the occasional 1 centimeter of records and a couple of photos, which of course happens now, the PAA also started receiving records of organizations and businesses, as well as prominent and average Ukrainian and their families. Many of these donations were significant in extent and complete in their scope of documenting the creator of the records. A very good thing. I don't need to belabor the point, but it did make me appreciate the commitment of those past staff who developed what we have. And from the 90s until just a few years ago, I've learned, Irene Janjewski, of course, was responsible for the acquisition and access to these larger and more extensive, richer bodies of records. From the 90s, I say, not the 60s, of course. Anyway, my point is that for the past number of years, the Archives was lucky to have strong ties to the Ukrainian community, strong advocates and stakeholders, and staff willing to champion the Archives and the Ukrainian holdings that we were developing. Once Irene retired, there was a large hole to fill with the Ukrainian program. And after 2010, I was faced with two challenges: a growing backlog of material, some of it in Ukrainian, and the other, no one to work on the non-English records. I don't read, write, or speak Ukrainian, so we've not had the luxury of Ukrainian-speaking archivist or a technician or someone with close ties to the community. And I think this has become a challenge overall at the archives as we acquire records of ethnic groups such as South Asian groups or East Asians where no one at the archive speaks the language. Who will work on them? So what have we done? Well, I say it's been a challenge, but it's not really an insurmountable one. Primarily because we have been able to build on the good foundational work of the past, and we've continued to work with the infrastructure and the supports that we already have in place. So I can talk here of the other main benefit that we have had going for us at the archives, and that is our Friends group. The Friends of the Provincial Archives of Alberta Society is a strong and involved group of volunteers external to the PAA, and they support the activities of the archives. The Friends have long been involved with our Ukrainian records, and it's that continuity that has helped us remain in such a strong position related to the holdings in general and the Ukrainian records in particular. The Friends have continued to offer help in the past number of years, and their work with stakeholders in the community has meant that I got lucky insofar as the language issue. And the backlog challenge and that language issue have been dealt with through external funding and special projects. We've been able to contract out work on the backlog and also to develop some of the finding aids we have. And one of the results of those projects was the annotated guide I mentioned. It was first published in 2010 by the Archives and by the Friends under Irene's supervision, and was recently revised in 2018 to celebrate the 125th anniversary of Ukrainian immigration to Canada. As I mentioned, the Friends and numerous community partners, including the Ukrainian Pioneers Association, Alberta Ukrainian Heritage Foundation, and the Alberta Society for the Advancement of Ukrainian Studies, provided funding to hire contract archivists to appraise, to process, and arrange or describe, or in some cases redescribe, records that were donated by or related to the Ukrainian community since 2010. This reduced that backlog and got bilingual descriptions completed. It also meant that we could hire an editor, Marina, who did an excellent job on the new edition of the guide. So without the Friends and their advocacy and their money, and the body of records representing the community already in place, I would say that we would not be as far along as we are now. I mean, the foundations that were built in the past, I can stand here today. And I don't need this to, become a celebration of past archival pioneers. It's about me, right? Know the Ukrainian language? Doesn't matter. I've spent so much time on Ukrainian-related stuff in the past few months, in assisting with the annotated guide, speaking to genealogical groups. I've been able to spend time reading about pioneers, business people, politicians, towns and villages. I've learned more about Ukrainians in this province than I thought I would ever need to know, and there's always more. I'm a convert. I made the trip out to Smoky Lake and Vilna and Glendon. I saw the pierogi, got my picture. I deserve that honorary Ukrainian designation. So I recognize that the Provincial Archives is in a very privileged position. A lot of the work we do and the wins we achieve are derived simply from being there to serve the public. We are adept at helping researchers coming to get historical homesteading information or vital statistics data, who are tracing their genealogy or family tree. And our holdings sometimes provide answers for academic researchers, community museums and archives, or for special projects like the Ukrainian Genealogical Project or the Century Farm Award. So that's where I am at now. And where do we go from here? Well, I'm not sure that there are large amounts of family records outside of Edmonton for the PAA, but even so, we need to heartily welcome donations that come into us. We need to reach those the new donors throughout the province, and of course, we should celebrate our existing donors. I would hope that the quality of the records continues to grow, but I'm not convinced that the number of donations will match those of the 1990s. And of course, I say this, when I wrote it, someone just called 2 days ago from Smoky Lake with records. So I think that one way the Provincial Archives can do more to ensure that records of the community are identified and preserved there is to continue to educate our donors and tell the public about what we do. I mean, communication is everything. We will continue to promote our holdings through social media, through special events, through outreach to interested groups and past donors. We create publications in print and online. We curate exhibits. We host events that promote Ukrainian heritage in the province. Perhaps we need to be more targeted in who's getting that information and who learns about us. It takes time and commitment to ensure that this communication is fostered and developed. But I think in a time of fiscal restraint, it's one of the easier things to do. So just to wrap up, I want to ensure that our Ukrainian records are at a minimum arranged, processed and accessible to patrons. I want to try and continue to get funding if we can and work with our partners and contractors to develop and promote finding aids that are bilingual and comprehensive. I would say that the PAA should focus on useful, value-added online finding aids that help identify Ukrainian records in the community and for the community, and continue outreach and collaboration with interested groups. We need to ensure that we communicate with past donors and hope that they spread the word on our behalf. And of course, if there is no extra funding, the work will continue. Even so, my goal is to foster capacity in staff, or at least an interest in the Ukrainian-related holdings. We can still create an environment that is inclusive. We can celebrate the heritage we are already preserving at the archives, and we can continue to ensure records of families and organizations are preserved for the future. Thank you.
Can you take some questions?
Sure.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes for questions. Anybody has any questions to ask?
It's okay if you don't. I'm serious about contacting me. If you want, just call me at the archives. We can talk. Yes, ma'am.
I'm interested, do you have any homestead documents about the Peace River country or your primary at Edmonton?
All through the province.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question as someone who teaches at the university and is always trying to think of ways to get students.
Yeah.
In your finding aids, is there an indication? I don't see it here. An indication of whether materials are in English or in Ukrainian?
Yes. The guidebook that you have, that annotated guide, is only a partial description of what we have. Everything online, including the full biographical sketch, full administrative history, full scope and content, is online, as well as a language note to say some records in Ukrainian, something like that. But I will tell you, and of course this is, I'm speaking, not my employer, but if you want to arrange with me to get records that would be of interest to your students, I'm more than willing to do that. So I was sincere this morning. I'm glad that everyone is coming here to get together today, because one of the things I want to do, we don't want the records at the archives to just sit. I want them to be accessed and used. And one of the things I want to do is work with the universities to ensure that people are aware of what we have and to incorporate them into the syllabus. That takes time, right? You have to have time, you have to have a faculty member who wants to be involved. So if we can do this, let's do it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
On this, the very beginning, do you also have a digital repository, or is yours primarily the tangible?
We take all formats of records including electronic.
One more thing, other people, again, I don't know if you mentioned this, I know you have a lovely room which has the books that are published by all those local organizations,
Yes.
which are very hard to get and also very interesting. So if some sort of little town or little church in the middle of nowhere published a history, you've got it.
Maybe. Yes, sir.
I know that in the language area, the province, the ministry, and various school boards have formed a partnership called Ulicon. Have you ever considered providing leadership from provincial archives to the community in a structured way so there can be an ongoing discussion among the community archives, museums, and yourself?
No, but that's something that I'm open to. I don't think it's something that the provincial archives would take the lead in. I mean, I don't know anything about it, but it's something that we would be willing to be involved in, of course. And I think it's just a matter of starting. I know that there are groups like the Alberta Society of Archives that provide support for many groups, but that, I mean, I can't start a group, but I can certainly help.
I just wondered if you could describe the process. Let's say a church group wants to turn over its records because they're not able to keep them.
Yeah.
How does that work in terms of, do you do some culling when you keep things and the things that really aren't worth keeping? How does that work, and how then are those records accessible to anybody who would like to go and look at them?
It depends. Can you tell that I'm a government worker? It depends. Church records, I hesitate to talk of church records because it depends what denomination. If we're talking, there's Orthodox Church, I don't want them. Because, as was mentioned this morning, churches preserve their own records for the most part. But again, that's something that, that we can talk about. You know, there's a certain amount of selection done on our end. With church records, it really does depend. It's very complicated, and it depends what church they come from.
Sorry, I'm just going to interject. I think you need to make a distinction between church records and the parish committee records. There's a difference there, right?
Yes, there is a difference, but I'm not going to go into it now. I think we are set for time, yeah. But as I say, if anyone has questions about donation or they want, have questions about what records to keep or throw away, call me. One more? Are we okay? One more, okay.
Just a quick one. Does your mandate allow organizations, individuals outside of the province? For example, the Basile collection that we have has got 65 films that are from that were toured around rural Saskatchewan. So I mean, it's very interesting. It could be some relevant things for our community members to see. Would we have access to those in Saskatchewan?
It depends. Yes, you would have access to them because we would digitize them for you. That's the answer. We do have some material from BC, from Saskatchewan, but it's very rare that we would do that. Mostly everything is from that's created in the province.
Thank you.
Thank you. The second speaker is James Kominowski from the University of Manitoba Archives. Since the year 2001, James has served as the Slavic librarian and archivist responsible for the development, maintenance, and enhancement of the Elizabeth Defoe Library Slavic collections and the archives of the Ukrainian Experience, which is housed within the University of Manitoba's Archives and Special Collections. In addition, he is the liaison librarian for German Studies. He provides reference and orientation assistance to faculty, graduate and undergraduate students, and researchers, and is the library's liaison with Manitoba's Slavic communities. His key interests lie in library instruction and pedagogy, acquisition and development of foreign language collections, and early 20th century Ukrainian history and literature. James holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and an MA in Ukrainian Literature from the University of Manitoba, and an MLIS, which is a library degree, from the University of Western Ontario. And he will be talking about a look at the origins and growth of the University of Manitoba's archives of the Ukrainian-Canadian experience.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Oh, sorry.
Display settings.
Display settings.
It's at the top.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. So what I'll be covering in my talk today is how and why did the Slavic collection come about at the University of Manitoba, and how it served as a precursor to the U of M archives of the Ukrainian-Canadian experience. And finally, I'll focus on 4 of our Ukrainian-Canadian archival collections: the Klenkiu family phones, the Alexander Koshev's choir phones, the Ukrainian National Home Association of Winnipeg phones, and the Victor Deneka phone. And I will be presenting some visual examples of the archival records, mostly photographs, from each of these respective collections via the PowerPoint. So I'm going to hopefully I'll be able to get through all this. But first, how and why was the Slavic collection established at the University of Manitoba? In 1949, a separate Slavic collection library was created at the University of Manitoba following the founding of the Department of Slavic Studies that same year. In order to support the courses and research in Slavic studies, the first department head, Dr. Yaroslav Rudnitsky, began the task of creating a library. A Ukrainian Studies Fund for the purpose of obtaining materials for this new library collection was established under the direction of Mr. Mark Smrchansky, a member of the University of Manitoba Board of Governors and a former member of Parliament. Monies from the fund were used to purchase the Chernevych family library, consisting of nearly 2,000 volumes of books and periodicals, and these books form the core portion of this new Slavic collection. Soon various Slavic organizations throughout Canada and the United States began to contribute books, including the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, Osaradok, the Ukrainian Free Academy of Sciences, Ukrainska Vylna Akademia Nauk, or UVAN for short. And the Slavic collection was originally kept within the offices of the Department of Slavic Studies until the construction of the new university library in 1953, when it was transferred over to it. From the start, the emphasis was placed on collecting materials dealing with Slavic languages and literature, with the appointment of Professor Paul Yuzek, who later became Senator Paul Yuzek, as the second faculty member of the Department of Slavic Studies. He encouraged not only the collection of language and the literary resources, but materials relating to history. So here we have both photos of Professors Rudnitsky and Yuzek. Since then, the collection has broadened its mandate by collecting materials in cultural or area studies. The collection has grown to nearly 80,000 volumes of books, periodicals, and newspapers in both paper and electronic formats, and comprising material in all 14 Slavic languages, with the majority being in Ukrainian, Polish, and Russian, the 3 Slavic languages that are taught through the Faculty of Arts. These materials support courses in the Department of German and Slavic Studies, the Interdisciplinary Central and East European Studies program, and the Center for Ukrainian-Canadian Studies. For the first several years, from 1949 to 62, there was no professional librarian in charge of the collection. It was not until 1962 that the first Slavic librarian was appointed, and Otto Brewer, who served until 64, and then he was replaced by Mr. John Muchin, who was the longtime Slavic librarian until 1989, and he was succeeded by Mavenka Koshchevas, and then I succeeded her. So the impetus for the creation of the Ukrainian archives goes back to 1999, following the arson fire which damaged the main level of the historic downtown building housing Osaradok. The center's boutique, which was located on the first floor, was completely destroyed, but thankfully the other floors, which contained the museum, the vast historic archives, and the library, were untouched. A few weeks after the fire, a meeting was requested with the university librarian, Carolyn Presser, by a number of faculty and community members. The reason for the meeting was to discuss the recent arson and the possibility of creating a Ukrainian-Canadian archives at the university. After the fire at Osaradok, the center was not able to employ a full-time professional archivist and librarian, which meant it could not for the next few years accept new archival or large book donations. Concerns were voiced at the meeting that potentially important Ukrainian-Canadian collections would go uncollected and possibly lost to future generations if there was no accredited archives in the city of Winnipeg willing to accept these archival records. After considering the advice from the faculty and community members, Carolyn Presser decided to go ahead and create a separate Ukrainian-Canadian archives housed within the archives of a separate Ukrainian-Canadian archives known as the Archives of the Ukrainian-Canadian Experience and housed within the U of M Archives and Special Collections. The mission of the new archives, which was officially named Archives of the Ukrainian-Canadian Experience, would identify, acquire, preserve, and interpret the Ukrainian-Canadian community's records. These individual collections would complement the efforts of other local and national institutions in preserving Ukrainian heritage in Canada. To oversee the new archives, the job description of the Slavic librarian was modified so that the individual would serve both as a librarian and an archivist. Although the U of M would begin collecting the archives of the Ukrainian-Canadian starting in 2001, the official launch of the Ukrainian-Canadian archives would not take place until April of 2003. One of the earlier collections, which was accepted by the U of M archives, was the Klemke family phones. The Klemke family phone consists mainly of the records of Walter and Mary Klemke, though a significant portion of the collection houses the life and career of Walter Klemke. The collection was donated in the spring of 2001 by Dr. Robert Klamash, a folklorist and retired museum curator of the Canadian Museum of History, on behalf of Klemke's widow Mary and her sons Slavko and Paul. Walter Klemke was born in southern Czechia, Ukraine in 1926, immigrating to Canada in 1928. He and his parents settled in Winnipeg. During the 40s, Klemke began attending the Ukrainian National Federation's summer Ukrainian higher education courses, which included a major music component. The courses were directed by the legendary Ukrainian musicologist Alexander Koshets until his untimely passing in 1944. The program was then headed by his widow Tetiana and musical director Pavlo Matsenko. It would be during these courses that he would meet Mary Kopyczański, whom he would later marry in 1952. In 1950, he earned a BA in English and History at the University of British Columbia, but returned a year later to Winnipeg and received a teaching certificate from the University of Manitoba. In 1951, he began conducting the Ukrainian National Youth Federation Choir, following the departure of the choir's founder and first director, Haya Khan. The Ukrainian National Youth Federation Choir would be renamed the Ukrainian National Federation Choir in 1964, and finally the Alexander Koshets Choir in 1967. In 1953, upon receiving his teaching certificate, Klemke became a history teacher and later a principal in the St. Vital School Division of Winnipeg. Following his retirement in 1983, Klemke devoted more time as a choral director of the Alexander Koshets Choir. During his nearly 50 years as director, Klemke and the choir toured throughout Canada, Ukraine, Poland, the Czech Republic, Western Europe, and South America. Under Klemke, the choir went on to do several record albums and CDs. His long tenure as director of the choir provided him with the opportunity to maintain and develop contacts with Ukraine's composers and artists. Much of it during the Soviet era, when some members of Winnipeg's Ukrainian community frowned upon it. Klemke fostered a special relationship with Anatoly Avdiivsky, director of the world-renowned Veryovka Ukrainian State Folk Choir, a relationship going back to Expo 67 in Montreal, where both Koshets and Veryovka choirs performed. The friendship that developed between Klemke and Avdiivsky led to the Koshets choir's first Ukrainian tour in 1978 and Veryovka's first Canadian tour in 1981. In 1978, Koshets choir tour introduced Ukrainian audiences to the works of Koshets, who during the communist era was officially ignored. In 1992, a year after Ukraine's independence, Walter Klemke and the Koshets Choir were awarded Ukraine's prestigious Taras Shevchenko State Prize, becoming the first individual organization from the Ukrainian diaspora to be so honored. Besides his choir, Klemke and his wife devoted much of their time to various community activities, including the Ukrainian National Federation, both the local St. Boniface and national branches, and Osaradok. They were also involved with various commercial ventures, including DK Attractions Limited, which brought over musical artists and performers from then Soviet Ukraine. The Klemke family phone is a large archival collection consisting of 10.5 linear meters of textual records and other material. There are over 200 photographs and slides, 70 video cassette recordings, as well as over 200 audio recordings. The video and audio recordings are mostly of the Koshets Choir's tours, concerts, and rehearsals. Also, the phone contains textual records and photographs of the St. Boniface branch of the UNF, including minutes of meetings of its executives, as well as, along with the family's archival collections, Mary Klemke donated hers and Walter's extensive library of over 1,500 monographs and periodicals relating to Ukrainian history, literature, folklore, and ethnography, and musicology. As well as Walter Klemke's collection of hundreds of musical scores and arrangements of Ukrainian folk, liturgical, classical, and contemporary music, many of which were used in the choir's repertoire. So within the photograph collection, there are personal and family photos. Here we have Walter Klemke at the age of 2 with his mother Hanya, and his graduation photo from the University of British Columbia in 1950. 2 additional photos, one with Mary Klemke at the Alexander Archipenko exhibit, and one with Walter Klemke during his early years as the new director of the UNF choir. Here a photograph given by Avdiivsky to Klemke showing the Veryovka choir at a rehearsal prior to arriving in Canada to perform at Expo 67. And a photo showing members of the Taras Shevchenko Prosvita Society of St. Boniface, part of the collection of photos Walter and Mary Klemke owned from the St. Boniface UNF. And one additional photo from that same collection, this was showing St. Boniface Mayor George McLean at the official opening of the new UNF building. Closely associated with the Klemke family phone is the Alexander Koshets Choir phone, which was donated to the University of Manitoba Archives in 2014 by its president, Mr. Scott Armstrong, on behalf of the Koshets Choir's executive. Following Klemke's passing in 2000, the choir had several directors, but it continues to thrive and perform several concerts annually. The Alexander Koshets Choir phone is an extensive collection consisting of 7.53 linear meters of textual records and other material. The collection contains brief notes and articles on the history of the choir, minutes of the executive and annual general meetings, rehearsal attendance records, the choir's incoming and outgoing correspondence, bulletins, announcements, concert programs, and posters chronicling its many local, national, and international tours. The Alexander Koshis Choir Fond is also contains scores of sheet music, over 1,700 photographs of major events and concerts, including its 4 tours to Ukraine in 1978, 82, 90, and 93. In addition, the collection holds audio and visual recordings in various formats and a few artifacts, among them plaques from the choir's international concerts presented to them by dignitaries of the cities the choir visited. So the first slide shows 2 posters from the collection. The one on the left is from the UNF's choir from June 1947, and the one on the right is of the 65th anniversary gala concert that took place in December of 2011. In the next slide, we have students and staff of the 1951 Ukrainian National Federation Higher Education course. Next, a photo from 1949 showing the Ukrainian National Youth Federation Choir with its founder and first director, Khalia Khan, who is seated in the middle wearing a dark dress. And this of the choir in 1958 under the direction of Walter Klemke. In the next slide, the Koshis Choir is performing on CBC Halifax in 1966. And then this is Walter Klemke and the Koshis Choir holding a reception for members of the Veriovka Choir during their visit to Winnipeg in September 1981. And the next one is a photo of one of our artifacts from the collection. This, a vinok, a woman's headdress or a wreath, which was presented to Mary Klemke by Anatoly Avdievsky, and its ribbons are signed by the members of the Veriovka Choir. So 2 more photos from this collection. A professional photo taken of Alexander Koshis Choir inside Winnipeg's Holy Trinity Ukrainian Orthodox Metropolitan Cathedral in 1994, and the following one, taken in 2008, of the Koshis Choir inside Winnipeg's Saints Vladimir and Olga Ukrainian Catholic Metropolitan Cathedral. Another significant institutional collection that comprises the archives of the Ukrainian Canadian experience is the Ukrainian National Home Association of Winnipeg Fond. It was donated in May of 2011 by the Executive Board of the Ukrainian National Home. The Ukrainian National Home of Winnipeg was officially established in 1913. It served as a secular organization regardless of one's religious or political affiliations. It was the headquarters of 3 of Winnipeg's largest Ukrainian educational and drama circles in the city at the time: the Boyan Choral and Drama Society, the Maria Zankonvetska Educational and Drama Society, and the Ivan Kotlarevsky Drama Society. In 1922, the 3 would amalgamate to form the Ukrainian National Home Choral and Dramatic Society. Other groups, such as the Ladies' Society of Lesya Ukrainka and the Ukrainian Relief Association, a fraternal sickness and death benefit society established in November of 1921, were all housed at the Ukrainian National Home. As a footnote, the Ukrainian Relief Association was later renamed the Ukrainian Fraternal Society of Canada, which began to sell insurance and continues to operate to the present day. The Ukrainian National Home also established a Ukrainian school, Aridna Shkola, in 1916, which thrived until the mid-1970s. And the Ukrainian National Home building was located in Winnipeg's north end and contained an auditorium, a library, a banquet hall, and several rooms which could be used as lodging for out-of-town visitors. The association remained active for nearly a century until 2011, when the executive board and the association's membership voted to dissolve itself. The Ukrainian National Home Association Fond contains 7.2 linear meters of textual records and other material. The textual records include correspondence, financial ledgers, membership lists, minutes of meetings, papers, and publications pertaining to the histories of individual groups. And were part of the association, posters announcing the concerts and plays performed by the Ukrainian National Home Choral and Drama Group, as well as sheet music, songbooks, and plays and operettas used for various performances. There are also 844 photographs, including professional studio photos and photo albums, focusing on various anniversaries and other special events. So in the first photo taken in 1916 of Ukrainian National Home, Rivna Shkola, here pictured with Yuri Genek in the back row, who was the teacher. Genek tragically passed away 2 years later in 1918 after contracting the Spanish influenza. Next is the large framed 4x5 foot collage of the 1918 membership of the Boyan Choral and Drama Society. We were given 2 such collages, this one and the Maria Zankovatska Educational Drama Society. The whereabouts of the Ivan Kotlyarevsky Society collage is unknown. And here are the members of the Ukrainian National Home Choral and Drama Society 1922 in costume performing the play Voskresenia, Resurrection. The next photo shows members of the Ukrainian Fraternal Society 1928. And in the back row, third from the left, is Taras Ferley, who was the first Ukrainian Canadian to be elected to the Manitoba legislature. This photo taken for the 25th anniversary banquet of the establishment of the Lesya Ukrainka Society. And finally, 2 examples of the National Home's collection of 2 by 3 foot full-size posters, which were used to promote concerts and special events. The one on the left is from 1914, promoting the Shevchenko concert celebrating the centenary of his birth. And the adjacent poster is of the Taras Bulba play with the participations of the actors from the Maria Zankovatska Educational Drama Society that took place in 1917. Just some time, or?
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, so we'll have 10 minutes. We'll have 10 minutes for questions.
Oh. Yes.
Do you have any challenges?
The challenges that we do have are sort of finding physical space to house a lot of these new collections, as well as digital space. And a lot of this also is financial in terms of challenges. A lot of the people, or even community members, they keep asking us, have you digitized our collection yet? Well, no, but we hope to maybe eventually. A lot of times we'll have to apply for grants to digitize even portions of collections. Yes.
I found your presentation very informative because I could then apply it to what could be donated through organizations to which I belong and families to which I belong to the provincial archives here in Edmonton.
Oh, okay, thank you. Oh, yes, sorry.
I was just wondering, how, do you have an idea of how many researchers actually access to it?
Oh, we actually get a lot of inquiries just within the community itself, but probably within the last 2 years we're having more and more requests from Ukraine. For the Klemku collection, he'll be celebrating, or has just celebrated his, I guess, the 90th anniversary of his birth. And Sarun Shikir has contacted me to actually digitize a few of the photos, programs of concerts and that, which I've done, and forwarded to them. They're actually creating an exhibit to honor him. So, yes.
Who actually, I guess, pushed the issue for the creation of the archive? Whether this would be in terms of individuals and or associations, and was it a slam dunk at the university, or was it an object of discussion?
I know that there were a few faculty members that sort of, well, one of them was Natalia Palou, was one of the things, and one of the members who actually approached the university librarians. There was also, I can't remember all the individuals. I saw a memo one time that sort of mentioned it. I know there was some opposition to starting yet another special archives. We do have a few special archives. We have agricultural experience archives, an Icelandic collection archives, also Western Canadian archives, and a few other ones. And the concern was the cost of taking on yet another archives. Would we be able to support it? And also the factor of space at the time. We ended up actually getting some space with the building of an annex that's attached to the library, but again, now we're sort of again losing space, and we're thinking of external storage for any future collections.
Thank you, James. Very interesting presentation. I think your situation at the University of Manitoba is somewhat unique in terms of you have a special division dedicated, you have a special Slavic librarian first, and you have a division dedicated to Ukrainian Canadian experience archives. I don't know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, of any other provincial, national, or university institutions that have that. So my question is more rhetorical probably, but are you getting donation offers from across Canada? And if not yet, are you ready to accept them? Because as we know, on the provincial level here, we don't really have anyone who speaks Ukrainian at the provincial archives at this moment in time. At the University of Alberta Archives, we have 2 full-time archivists, which is nearly not enough for the volume of information that there is. So there is a possibility that you will get more. Yeah. Are you ready?
Well, I guess that's sort of the challenge. And one of the other collections I didn't actually get a chance to speak about, the Victor Deneka fonds. So he was an architect who designed a lot of Ukrainian churches, sort of more modern Ukrainian churches in Winnipeg and throughout Manitoba. And I think originally the family approached the Ukrainian Catholic Archieparchy, their archives, and I think they didn't have actually the space to take that on, the archives. So then they came to us and we accepted it. There's a lot of blueprints in that, and the designs that he created for each church. So there's that in itself is a lot of space, to actually store material. So we're becoming a bit more selective in terms of what we can actually take and how relevant it is, sort of like to the province and sort of to the community.
Well, I hope we get a Slavic archivist in each and every one.
Last question. Manitoba Provincial Archives, can you say anything about the Ukrainian collections that they might hold and like the Leo Mole stuff? Where is it?
The Leo Mole stuff, we actually received a portion of it. And apparently the remainder of it went to the Ukrainian Catholic Archieparchy. His widow passed away suddenly, and she had actually willed to us several more boxes of materials concerning his time in the Caucasus when he still lived in the Soviet Union at the time. When he passed away, that material all disappeared. So we had no idea what actually happened to it. And then I asked the executor to the will, or to the estate, I should say, he had no idea what happened to it. But I was about to go on a study leave. This was in March, and I had visited his wife at the end of that week, and she had told me, at that time she was I think 94, and she said, oh well, I've already have everything put aside, it's labeled to the ULM archives, so if something should happen to me, I'm 94 years old, and I said, well don't talk about that, well I'm 94 years old, something could happen, and so I said, but I have it all marked down, not to worry. So then she actually passed away while I was on my study leave. So when I got back and contacted the executive of the estate, he had no idea what happened to the remaining boxes. So.
Okay, our next speaker, our third speaker, is Andrew Chernevych from the Galt Museum and Archives. He's the head archivist of the Galt Museum and Archives, Lethbridge, Alberta. He's a graduate of the U of A's Ukrainian Folklore Program, who has worked at the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village, Provincial Archives of Alberta, as well as the City of Wetaskiwin Archives. In 2011, Andrew came to southern Alberta to take over the operations of the Galt Archives with the Galt Museum and Archives in Lethbridge. As the largest archival depository in southwest Alberta, the Galt Archives functions as a de facto regional archives. Over years, Andrew has had a chance to explore and provide support to many small heritage institutions in the area, which gave him a deeper understanding of the region, its history, and culture. It also brought him in touch with the Lethbridge Ukrainian community, small and isolated, but resilient group proud of its heritage and culture. Andrew will talk about the topic of his talk is Off the Beaten Path, Ukrainian Canadian Records in Southern Alberta. Andrew?
Thank you. Okay, I'll try to speak louder because I need to also look at my notes. And it's great to be back. So my presentation tonight will be covering geographical area somewhere on the fringes, and that's why I call it Off the Beaten Path, Ukrainian Canadian Records in southern Alberta. In Alberta, the block settlement has been the focal point of Ukrainian life. The Ukrainian village, the Kalina country. There are some small local museums that cover Ukrainian experience. And this heritage has been studied and celebrated and promoted to the larger society. And on the other hand, the Ukrainians who settled in other areas, however, received much less attention. And one of those less studied regions is southern Alberta. And by southern Alberta, for this talk, I mean the true south of Calgary. That's what it is.
We call it the deep south.
Okay, that's another. Okay, so here we go. So let's look at this map taken from the publication Creating a Landscape, a Geography of Ukrainians in Canada. This is, so where those green triangles are, this is the block. This is the Ukrainian block east of Edmonton. So let's look south over here. Are there Ukrainians there? Well, I don't see any. Well, the thing is, this map is somewhat deceptive because it only marks high concentration area of Ukrainians, and whatever falls under this certain ethnic density threshold is basically off the radar. That's why we don't see anything green over there. And but let's zoom in. Here we go. So this is the Lethbridge area. And here we are, just east of the city of Lethbridge in the 1920s. This is in fact a portion of the so-called Cummings map from 1927. So the map is basically, it's similar to those county maps that you've all seen. So it marks the land ownership. So we have names over there of local farmers and ranchers. So what I did, I've gone over the map and just looked individually at those names. And marking anything that remotely resembles Ukrainian names. So I came up with Vasiliniak, Oleshasky, Vasilinyuk, Elnitsky, Baida, Bahara, Hemelrik, Stanka, and Sosnowski over there. So sounds Ukrainian, right? But not all of them are actually Ukrainian. I know that for sure because later I had the suspicion, but I discovered that Vasilinyaks that are over there in the upper left corner, they're actually not Ukrainians, they're Slovaks. There is a pioneer clan of Slovak settlers with that last name who later lived in Lethbridge, so they are very likely to be Slovaks with V in Vasilinyaks. So probably about out of all those green circles, probably half of them are actually Ukrainians. So there are, if you look at other names, there are lots of British, German, Scandinavian names. And as you can see, Ukrainians are just a relatively small ethnic component in that mix. And this situation certainly made this Ukrainian experience very different from the Ukrainian bloc settlement. But homesteaders is just part of that story. In fact, many Ukrainians came to this area as workers to find employment at local coal mines, particularly in Lethbridge area and Crow's Nest Pass. So in this case, we're talking about the urban setting. So we're talking the city of Lethbridge and small towns as well. And on this picture, chances are one of those coal miners is Ukrainian. So this work had a seasonal character, so there was a fair share of travel in and out of the region and high rate of younger men without families taking this employment. Okay, and that's the map of the area. Just to orient yourself, this is again from the 20s. Calgary is up there. The dotted line over here is the international border, US border. And I just marked those two areas of the high concentration of Ukrainians in the area. That's the city of Lethbridge over there and a few towns nearby, like Colehurst. And the second one is, you see those are mountains. And that's the Crow's Nest Pass that I was talking about. And those two centers are connected with CP Rail. So these social and economic conditions affected the paper trail that the local Ukrainians left behind. With fewer community institutions, well, relatively fewer community institutions, and fewer records, the researcher will have to rely more on sources about Ukrainians than as opposed to sources created by Ukrainians. So let's look at what's available in this region. Some of those records can be found at the Gold Museum and Archives in Lethbridge, which is the largest archival institution of southwest Alberta. And as such, the institution actually serves as original archives. And I happen to be the archivist who manages the operation of this institution. And I've been around for about 7 years, and I think I have a fair knowledge of the holdings. And by the way, the building was the 1911 hospital, And the archives is located over there in the basement. So the windows, little windows on this side. It's usually in the basement. That's where the archives are. And there is a storage facility over there and a research room. And whenever you happen to be in Lethbridge, please visit. It's very close to downtown. It's easy to get there, and I will be very glad to show you around and to familiarize yourself with that institution and the archives. So a little bit about the archives. So as I mentioned, the mandate is, our geographical mandate is Southwest Alberta, so it's not just the city of Lethbridge, but also smaller communities in the area. So it's roughly, the boundaries of that geographical area is BC border on one side, roughly Bow Island, that's halfway between Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, on the east. Nanton, that's approximately the town of Nanton is the northern border, and the US border is on the south. So that's our square, that's our geographical mandate. So we've got approximately 200 meters of records overall, like all the records, and about 500,000 photographs. For staff, we're a small operation. It's just me full-time and the archives assistant part-time. And we have about 12 volunteers coming in shifts to do some work for the archives. And we usually have a summer student. In terms of financial situation, we're pretty stable. We're funded by the city of Lethbridge, and we basically operate as a city department. And we're funded as a city department. And we're pretty busy with about 750 requests per year, which is pretty high for an archives of our size. Just for comparison, I know that the cities of Saskatoon archives averages about 400 requests, and they are a much bigger community. In addition to that, answering the research request, we also run public programs and exhibits, and we're talking specifically archival programs and exhibits. It's not talking about the museum side. And the archives itself is open Monday to Friday. And we also have an online database that you can browse and just put keywords like Ukrainian, and you will see all the Ukrainian records that we have in the archives, and I will be talking about many of them just in a minute. So first, about something that is records about Ukrainians, not created by Ukrainians. And one of those sources is the Henderson directories. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those published in Calgary and in Edmonton. The same style of directories existed in the city of Lethbridge. And they contain listings of individuals with address, occupation, and company. So you can learn where the person worked, for what company, and in what capacity. So lots of personal information in those public directories. You don't see anything like that right now. People are more concerned with privacy these days. But we're lucky to have those resources. And the Ukrainian names are regular occurrence over there. I just circled one of them. It's Popovich over there in green circle. And there are actually several representatives of that family listed. And so this source allows you to even run a statistical analysis on where in the city Ukrainians lived and what kind of jobs they had and in what industries they were involved, worked predominantly, hint, it's coal mining. So with regard to Sam Popovich, it's actually an interesting story. That's why I circled him. A few years after, he would die in a mining in a mine accident, and that looked a lot like a case of negligence. And there was an investigation and trial based on that accident. And but the interesting thing is that And the person was actually from the city of Chernevych, that accidentally I'm also from. And the interesting thing that happened afterwards, and it doesn't happen very often, that his family, Sam Popovich's family from Chernevych, or Chernevych at that time, sued the mining company for damages in civil court for, I think, about $150,000. And the case was accepted, but later it was put on hold because the World War I started. So I got really curious about this when researching this, wondering what kind of family that was, because regular peasant family doesn't sue companies across the ocean. So a lot of interesting questions out there. And that's another source that is about Ukrainians and is very rich, and that is the Lethbridge Herald newspaper. Excellent resource, and this is just to give you the context that it's the main newspaper for the city for many, many years, for over a century. And the great advantage and convenience is that the Herald is digitized and searchable by keywords online from 1904 to 2016. You just go online, and you get into the database, and you can search all the articles by keywords starting from 1904. And you can search for Ukrainian or Austrian or Galician or Ruthenian. All of those words would be relevant. You see in that article, right in the center, in the sub-headline, it says Ruthenian first man. So in this case, the person is referred as Ruthenian. And so one type of articles I find particularly informative is trial reporting, and that's the case. This is just one in a series of articles about that famous Chobotar case. So in this case, it happened in the city of Lethbridge, and Vasil Chobotar, a miner, it was a murder case, shot a fellow countryman, Alex Lazaruk, with a revolver, and later died of wounds. Well, there are a lot of interesting circumstances about that case. There was a feud preceding that. There was a woman involved. It was a big publicity thing. It was a trial. Of course. It was a trial by jury and extensively publicized and covered in the paper, with testimonies reported with great attention to detail. Even look at this article, it's just half of the article. They're just reporting on everything, like individual testimonies, like lots of details over there. So it's a great source for ethnographic information. So we learn, for example, that on the day of execution, because he was sentenced death, and that was the first hanging in Lethbridge, actually. The day of execution was January 13, and Vasil Chobotar refused to eat breakfast because it was a fasting day. So they would report all those things. And yeah, you can research that. There are a lot more articles on that case. The Gold Archives houses also another sizable photographic collection from the Lethbridge Herald, and that's separate. This is photographic collection of Lethbridge. We're not talking about the newspaper per se. Those are the photographs taken by newspaper photographers from the 1950s to the 1990s. And among other things, the photographs capture Ukrainian content. There are over 60 photo sets that contain Ukrainian-related subject matter. And on the images above, there is a blessing ceremony of the St. Vladimir Ukrainian Church in Lethbridge. captured, I believe, in the 50s. Then we have a women's groups displaying items, Ukrainian items, at the Galt Museum. And the third picture is obviously taken in the 60s. You can tell by the fashion. That is a table set up for a family Christmas celebration, again in the city of Lethbridge. So those are various pictures that the newspaper photographers produced when the story was covered by the paper. So the advantages of those photographs is that we have they come in sets, so we have multiple shots from each of those assignments. They have dates and names, and normally there is a corresponding article in the newspaper that you can find and match with that picture. And pictures were usually actually published in the paper. And the images are excellent quality because they were produced by a professional photographer, and often they are larger size negatives, so like good quality pictures. Mm-hmm. So another collection, and this is actually something that is produced by Ukrainians. It's Tryanda Ukrainian Dance Club phone. And we received this a few years ago, donated by the organization itself. They were downsizing at that point. They were looking for to move all those papers. And we are talking about 1.5 meters of textual records, administrative records, minutes, list of members, correspondence, grant application, and so on. And we've got some photographs. And I just put a few of those. This is at that time a young dancer. In about 15 years or so, she will become the instructor for Tryanda dance, Anastasia Soreda, her name. And what I also love about some of those pictures is that they are not just publicity photos, but something that is backstage, that is captures the culture of dancers. So it is a dressing room picture. So kind of like something you don't see very often in publications, but allows you to research more. The Ostapovich family phone, I will just speed up a little bit because I don't have much time. This is, we're talking about a series of photo albums from Ostapovich family. The context is actually Saskatchewan. And what I like about the pictures like this one in the upper left corner is that it captures the part of everyday culture. And in this case, I'm just thinking, looking at that picture, I'm thinking of Dr. Nahachevsky's notion of first existence of Ukrainian dance in the Canadian context. So in this case, it's not a staged Ukrainian dance, it's the kind of vernacular Ukrainian dance as a social dance. So in this case, it's fascinating. You see people dancing, doing the spinning formations, the spectators over there. It's a very rich photograph. So let's move further. Peter Palmarchuk Memoirs, it's just the one item, it's a diary written in Ukrainian. And in this case, we are dealing with the memoirs of like thinking about years, the first years in Canada, referring to the 1920s. Very interesting, rich resource. And on the second page, it tells about this traumatic incident of that brother Nestor going back to Ukraine and getting in 1921 and getting robbed. Well, those robbers entered the family demanding money. Some of the family members were beaten, and actually death happened. So that was in graphic detail described that experience. Very rich resource. And finally, some oral history interviews. William Robulak was interviewed twice, over the first time in 1986 and the second time in 1994. There is some overlap, but basically it's a life story. Two, I would say, variants of the person's life story, settling in the Lethbridge area, and about his father going, working for the mines, then going into farming, back into the mines, back into the farming. Very, very interesting resource. And do I have any time right now? Okay. Well, unfortunately, I will have to skip the whole. Well, I'll just show you the pictures then. So that's another portion I mentioned, the Crow's Nest Pass and the small mining towns over there. There were Ukrainians there. There was a Ukrainian community. The Crow's Nest Museum is the depository for all those records, and Chris Matthews is the director, and he provided the pictures. The most significant collection over there is the Gushel family phone. If you probably heard about the Gushels, they're the photographers for the Crow's Nest Pass. Some of the photographs are found in the Glenbow, but what I didn't know myself, that 80% of those photographs are actually at the Crow's Nest Pass in the community with the Crow's Nest Museum, and a very rich resource. Some of those pictures, I got them from Chris Matthews. They showcase the Ukrainian community and the activities that were going on. There was a hall over there. There was a church at one time. And there are some facts that I've already mentioned. And that's it. Thank you very much. If you have questions.
We have about 10 minutes for questions.
Sure. I suspect that that's one of the challenges you face, because you won't find a paper trail for Ukrainians in your area. I suspect that the paper trail for most Ukrainians that went into the Crow's Nest Pass, Lethbridge, Tabor, those areas, will be found in northern Alberta, because most of them went down there for seasonal work. They would return to their homesteads and that sort of thing.
That's a possibility.
But if you do look further, like there's evidence of Ukrainians. Like if you look at the mine disaster at Hillcrest, the one that happened in 1914, many of the names around that monument are Ukrainian names.
Exactly.
And then you had several ULFDA halls. All of them are defunct now. I don't know if you have any of those files. There was also the beet workers, the sugar beet workers around Tabor. Many of them were Ukrainians. And I suspect that most of them would have stayed there a little longer.
I would say it's more Raymond, actually.
Raymond, okay, that's the area I meant. Finally, the Drumheller Valley. I think that many more settled down in that area as well.
I think you're right. That's one of those areas that are off the radar, and I just learned from Miron about that community. I don't know much about that community, but apparently there were Ukrainians and similar to the Crow's Nest Pass, there were miners over there. Probably some farmed over there, but a lot of them were miners.
I'll come down and visit you. We'll have one
Absolutely, yes.
I was just saying that there weren't just people from the farms going down to the Crow's Nest Pass. My grandfather would go from Pennsylvania, and other Pennsylvanians would come up to the Crow's Nest Pass and work for a while and then go back.
It was a huge center for
And I have to add that they would walk all the way from Redwater or Vilna.
Wow, okay. That's a lot. Yes?
I want to know about Ukrainian churches in the area.
Well, there was a Ukrainian church, as I mentioned. There was a Ukrainian Catholic church. It's not Ukrainian church anymore. Years ago, it was sold to another congregation, but I believe it still exists.
Which one are you talking about?
I don't remember what it's.
So there's two in Oyen, one
Okay.
in Lethbridge, and then
No, I'm talking about Crow's Nest Pass.
yeah, there's the one with there's Orthodox and Catholic. Orthodox and
Yes, I know about the Catholic. It was sold to another congregation. I don't remember the name of it right now. For Lethbridge, there is this operating Peter and Paul Church, which is Catholic, Ukrainian Catholic. there is an operating Trinity Church, which is Orthodox, and they just like 2 blocks away from each other in Northern Lethbridge. And that's it. They used to be St. Vladimir's Church, but not anymore.
The most important question was Chobotara Galician or Bukovinian?
I think he was a Galician. I can dig it out. They recorded a lot on him. Yeah. Yes, he.
Yes, Andrei, you said it's great to be back and it's great to see you. We heard a presentation just before you about archival holdings at the University of Manitoba. What does the University of Lethbridge have in terms of archival holdings?
Very few. Actually, I did the kind of preparing for this. I did the inventory that probably have about 10 that you can call small form, and few other items. Probably half of them were covered in this presentation. Not much, but there are things. Plus, there are hidden things. Like Maron mentioned that RCMP collected a lot of information on areas with active left-wing like miners and unions. So I'm sure there is a lot in the RCMP file on the crow's nest Ukrainians.
I just wanted to see if you, in your research, whether you found information about Rusinia in Lethbridge, separate.
Not as a separate thing. Some of them were referred as Ruthenians, but that would be sort of synonym.
I know the Peter and Paul Church was a Byzantine Catholic church. Not specifically Ukrainian.
Yes, that's true. The thing with the Peter and Paul, the way it's developed in the beginning, there were more Slovaks over there than Ukrainians. Actually, the parish leaders were mostly Slovaks, like Vasilinians were involved over there.
Last question. Okay, well, with that, Andrew,
Thank you.